The war in Ukraine is an existential fight for both Russia and Ukraine. And in fact, it could go either way. I expect it to really intensify this fall when the F-16s and perhaps the ATACMS or other long-range weapon systems arrive in Ukraine. I'm going to explain that. And it just so happens that, like I said, it could go either way. There are some weaknesses that were revealed to us by this resignation and rant of Russian Army Major General Ivan Popov. Now, this general just had a big rant, kind of like Prigozhin. And in fact, but in this case, Major General Ivan Popov is considered a major general of the military. He is not a rogue criminal mercenary. He is a well-respected member of the Russian system. He doesn't have a criminal record and all these kind of things. So when he says stuff, it gets taken a lot more serious. But he's made pretty much similar, if not the same, allegations that Mr. Prigozhin made. And in fact, one of the things he complained about, underlies what I said just a few videos back, was one of the weaknesses of Russia, which, if exploited by Ukraine, would give them a chance to win and get behind the lines. But if Ukraine's going to win, they got to do it soon. Russia could win in the long term if they have the willpower to keep fighting. And that's an if. If's a mighty big word to be so little. So this war, as I said, can go either way. So what happens here is that Popov, he said that, hey, we're not getting ammunitions. We're not getting munitions to fight at war. We're losing people because we're not being adequately supplied. Yeah, that's what Prigozhin said. And in fact, when Prigozhin made his march on toward Moscow, most of the military just kind of stood back and watched. There were some that resisted and a lot that did nothing. And I'm also going to explain why Rostov-on-Don is critical. So hang on, guys. So what this exposure says is this, is that they're not getting the supplies at the front line from the Russian side to fight like they want. Of course, Zelensky is making the same complaint, saying that we're not, despite the fact that we've spent 40-something, maybe 70-something $billion from the United States alone to Ukraine, that they're not getting the supplies they need to fight. The fact of the matter is, a war takes a lot of munitions. Hello, U.S. services, you're underarmed right now, especially if you got to go to China. And I'm sure Xi Jinping is laughing and smiling at all this. But anyway, back to the story here. One of the reasons for this, of course, it might be just general supplies, but a lot of it is the logistics. Russia uses railheads, rail lines, to send their artillery rounds, a lot of their ammunition, to the front. So they don't have semi. I was in Russia for a week in Moscow. Up and down the major highways in Moscow, rode around some, going to different institutions there in their space program. Never saw a single semi truck, not one. I saw like 2-ton, 2.5-ton trucks like the one I got in my front yard. Nothing bigger, not really. That was about all I saw there, with covers over, lots of those. But they don't have the logistics capabilities there that most Western militaries have. And they're bringing this stuff on railheads. I've heard from a couple of sources, one of them being, well, I won't go into that. But anyway, I've heard from a couple of sources that they're actually unloading the munitions by hand, which don't make a lot of sense. Russia's got a lot of timber. They ought to be able to build pallets, and with all their industry, they should have forklifts. Why are those not on the front? Maybe they're there now. But in any case, that's not so material as the fact that all this stuff is coming through centralized transportation systems like railheads to ammo depots, which are all excellent targets for somebody that got the long range to hit them. Now, most of the weapons that the Ukrainians have had to date don't quite reach deep enough to get some of these. If they get the ATACMS missile, it's a whole new game. If they get the F-16s, it's a whole new game. I really don't expect that the Ukrainians will make their major move until they get both the ATACMS and F-16s. I could be wrong. They could try to break through beforehand, especially if they see what they think is a weakness. I'd probably go for it. But the Russian lines are not weak. They are tough. They got lots of landmines. They got those dragon teeth. They got the trenches that the tanks would get stuck in. If you try to advance those against the Russian front lines, and then got their dug-in trenches, foxholes, bunkers. Yeah, the Russians are going to be hard to rout out if that's what the Ukrainians are planning to do. They need some game-changing things to starve them of their ammunition, to bring down their morale, to make them ready to break and run if they hit them. And the way to do is run them out of ammo. And they may be running a little bit critically low now. That might be an advantage they could get now if they wanted to take it. But like I said, I'm not taking sides here. Do not take anything I say to be taking sides. I'm explaining, sometimes I explain the perspectives of each. That don't mean I agree with what's done. War is terrible, but in any event. So the situation here is that if the Ukrainians can take out those ammo depots in the rear, they've got a chance to starve out the troops on the front to the point that they could find a point of weakness, especially if they got the assistance of the F-16s and make a breakthrough and get behind the enemy lines, the Russian lines, enemies to them. If they can get behind, they might just bypass them. What they really ought to do, if they want to win the war, is go to Rostov-on-Don and take that, because that's the central transportation system, the node that supplies all the stuff that's being sent to Ukraine for the Russians to fight the war. If the Ukrainians took Rostov-on-Don, they pretty much have nixed the capability of Russia to prosecute the war. I said if. Now, we don't know if they can get through there, or if that will happen. That is the way they win the war. The way the Russians win the war is just let the Ukrainians keep throwing themselves up against the front lines and run their people out, because even though we can send all the armaments in the world and just keep sending planes and tanks and Bradleys and missiles and artillery shells, we can't make new Ukrainians. And they don't breed fast enough, especially when a lot of the people have fled the country. No, the Ukrainians will run out of people. They'll run out of soldiers that are able to fight, and that won't take too long. It's already said they're drafting old men and young men in youngins and old men in Kyiv right now. That's what I've heard. But whatever the case is, sooner or later, it's going to be too late for Ukraine. There'll be nothing that can save them. And if Russians can just wait it out, then they can just push on through. They could take Ukraine at that point. Ukraine will be too weak to resist. And that's probably their strategy. I had said in the past that if Russia was to come up around from Belarus and come down the western side of Ukraine and cut off the supply lines, like I'm talking about how Ukraine could take off the supply lines, the Russians, if the Russians could take out the supply lines from the west, from the western side of Ukraine to Ukraine, they could do the same thing to Ukraine. That's another way that Russia could win, but they've not shown a lot of massing of troops up there. It seems that they were concentrating on just holding that line, and that might mean that's their strategy, is to have a good defense and let the enemy exhaust themselves on the front line. And if you want to win, that's not a bad strategy. That's the most conservative strategy to take. Now, it might be that the Wagner force is amassing up in Belarus to make some hits on those supply lines. Could they actually move down there and hold it? Probably not without the Belarusian army getting involved. Would Belarus join the fight? I don't know. Lukashenko makes a lot of talk, but he don't want to take his eyeball off Poland, because Poland would like to whop it. Of course, if Poland gets in, then we got World War III for sure. So what I'm expecting here is that won't happen. It might happen. There might be some raids. The Wagner or whoever might make special forces, might make raids on the supply lines in Western Ukraine. That's possible, but they've not done it yet. But that may be why they're gathering up in Belarus. And it may also be because Belarus wants the Wagners to help defend them from Poland. The Polish do not like Belarus. No, they don't like Lukashenko. Let me be more specific. And the Polish are actually concerned that Russia will invade them, because Ukraine was probably never really truly the objective of Russia. Despite all the things they said, the Russians are most likely following the old playbook that was set forth by Peter the Great and Catherine the Great to basically try to put the Russian forces, I'm not saying it, I'm not justifying this, I'm just telling you how they've strategized things historically, to try to put Russian forces south of the Carpathian Mountains and the gap to the sea there, and north of the Carpathian Mountains, which is through Poland. So ideally, the Russians would want to take Moldavia and a good piece of Romania and Poland. At a minimum, they would want to sell the Zhulavsky Gap, which is between Belarus and Kaliningrad. They might settle for that, but Poland would probably be an objective if they thought they could take it. Now, Poland knows this, and Poland is arming up really fast. Poland is taking this seriously because they expect the Russians want to come through there. Now, you may know Russia don't want to. Actually, Vladimir Putin himself pretty much validated that viewpoint when he went to that big Peter the Great ceremony several months ago. He pretty much laid it out. That was pretty much actually his objective. He kind of let it loose. It's not something you want to telegraph immediately. Oh yeah, Romania, Moldova, Poland, we're coming for you. While he's busy fighting Ukraine. You don't really want to do that, but he kind of let it slip there. And that's been the objective that the Russians have followed for ages back. And since then, so the problem is that it's like a wide open, flat plain once you get into Europe, all the way into Moscow. Just like Prigozhin. Once he got on the highway, he was running for it. And that's what the Russians are afraid of. Once you get in there with a highly mobile force, you might get Moscow really quick. And that's what scares them. And what they're most scared of is back in World War II. I mentioned this in previous video, and somebody's bringing up some other stuff. I'm just talking to you from the Russian perspective. Because you want to defend yourself does not give you the right to subjugate another people. I believe in self-determination of all people, okay? Whether it is Ukrainians who don't want to be under Russian rule, or Polish who don't want to be in Russian rule, or the people in Donetsk and Luhansk, if they want to be Russian, then let them. Let each people group determine themselves. The Poles and the Ukrainians want to hold Donetsk and Luhansk, and the Russians won't remain Ukraine. So, it should be that we ought to be able to have a peace treaty somewhere along there. That there's some median line. Okay, this is what you hold. This is what you keep. The problem is, we might get a temporary peace treaty, but in the end, Ukraine's still going to want their territories back no matter what. And Russia's still going to have the same objectives they had all along, no matter what. So any peace that might be brokered is not highly likely to last for decades. At some point, sooner rather than later, it's probably going to break. On the Russian side, their demographic is falling. They say their population is dropping. They say this probably is their last great chance to secure their borders. Now, in World War II, when the Germans came in, I should be careful how I say and how I say it, Operation Barbarossa, it caused the death of a lot of Russians, something on the order of over 7 million Russians died immediately from the war, and they lost 3.5 million in prison camps, POW camps. And so they don't want that to happen. It's a huge portion of their population back in right in World War II. Now, of course, Ukrainians don't see that as an excuse why they should sacrifice their existence, because they lost to the Holodomor famine 3.5, some people say up to 5 million people. So there's plenty of angst and counter angst. And here's the thing. If Ukraine should succeed and get through and take Rostov-on-Don, you can bet there's actually rebel legions or groups, regiments, whatever they are, in Chechnya that want to rebel still, in spite of Kadyrov. They'd like to overthrow Kadyrov and make Chechnya an independent nation. You can expect the Caucasus to unzip. That's another area right now. Russia thinks they got secure down there because they got their friendly forces in control. If the Caucasus start unzipping and Rostov-on-Don's taken, you can also expect a couple of the republics out in Siberia, other ethnic republics within the Russian Empire, might also decide to unzip. You can see Russia coming apart. This is why the Russians, this is existential to their survival. But for Ukraine, it's very much existential to their survival too. And they're not going to trust the Russians at some peace, because they're going to know if we got this peace deal, it's just a matter of time. They're going, once they get their reserves built back up and get their strength back up, they're going to go whop one more time. And the Ukrainians are going to go whop again too. So it's hard seeing an enduring, lasting peace here, unless one side or the other just falls internally. And that's possible. If Rostov-on-Don falls and Russia unzips, then that might happen. The Ukrainians would be tempted to want to do a replay of what happened with Prigozhin and make it run on Moscow, because they really want to punish Putin. That would be exceedingly dangerous, because that's why Russia has nuclear weapons. And in fact, if they go into Rostov-on-Don, then they might use them. You got to remember, Voronezh is on the way to Moscow, and they have a big nuclear stockpile there in Voronezh. Some people think that the Wagner Group might have got a few of them. They must say they tried to get in and didn't make it in. We don't know for a fact either way, I suppose. Yeah, I've heard both claims. I'm tending to think they didn't get them, but we don't know for a fact. we do know is that it's on the way where they have a major nuclear weapons storage depot. Now, maybe the Russians would evacuate that if the Ukrainians took Rostov-on-Don. But at the same time, if Rostov-on-Don falls, any previous held Russian territory, that might provoke World War III. That might provoke at least tactical nukes to be used in Europe when Ukraine, and they might even go for NATO, especially if NATO systems are used in that fight. Now, so the Russians, if the smartest thing on the Ukraine side, I'm not taking sides here. I'm just saying, looking at from each perspective. If the Ukrainians wanted Moscow to fail, they would probably, if they were to play that card as smart as they could, they would try to get the so-called rebels, like the Russian Legion of Freedom Legion, whatever they call themselves, that guy named Caesar runs, to be the ones that make the charge on Moscow. But the optics of that aren't going to be too great either, because they got a lot of American equipment, and they're coming out of Ukraine, and they've already the Russians already said this is not really Russian rebels. They've said this is mercenaries and Ukrainians and whatever else, the NATO. So they're going to have a hard time seeing this as a Russian rebellion, although it might evolve into that. But if somebody were to go into Moscow, it'd be better if it were Russian and not Ukrainian or American or NATO. But if anybody goes into Russia, it's pretty much game over. All bets are off. It's what will happen next. You could see tactical nukes flying. You might even see strategic nukes flying. So I said might. Might's growing chickens too, right? That's what I always heard growing up. You said the word might. I was like, might's growing chickens. Well, the situation is that this war is likely to intensify once the F-16s arrive and attack them. This fall is what we're probably looking at. It might go into the winter as an intensive battle. Who knows how long that would take? It's going to be a slugfest. If Ukraine don't win fast and decisively, they're in great trouble. But on the other side, the fact that that the Wagner Group was not opposed very strongly on their march to Moscow by the Russian military, the fact that this Major General Popov has made statements just like Prigozhin, means that there's probably a lot of dissatisfaction in the Russian military. The system might fall apart internally. I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying it might. Again, yeah, they're growing chickens, right? But it could go. This war could go either way, but it's going to intensify before it don't. It's going to get a lot more intense. And as long as either side is standing at the end, you probably don't have, as long as both sides are still standing at what you think is the end, you're probably not at the end. It's probably just an intermission, and it'll probably halftime game or halftime or something. It'll probably flare up again as long as either side is at it. So what I've said before again is, if the Russians, there's that word if they're willing to stay in the battle for the long term, if they can hold on for the long term and not get the rear areas knocked out, or have some way to back that up in case their rear areas where their ammo depots are, if they got some way to back that up, then and sustain and survive the battle, then look out. They'll probably take Ukraine eventually, and maybe even go into Romania, at least still the Zloty Gap, but take part of Lithuania. Will they go into Poland? Well, they have to be pretty strong. Take on yet another country, they might. But Poland is arming up because Poland's expecting it. So what's going to happen? How's this all going to play out? I don't know, my friends. I don't know. But this to me is a matter that ought to be resolved by Europeans. It's a European question. And the Europeans are too reliant on us to cover most of this for them, in my humble opinion. So why should we risk our cities on what should be backdoor affairs to a land that's got more people and more GDP than we do? We're so far in debt. I think the Europeans need to be stepping up to the plate here if that's what they want to do. I said if, and if, and if. And you got us securing or providing the security for France, and France is turning around and dealing with China and talking BRICS. Kind of frost my, yeah. I'm not exactly a happy camper seeing some of the things that some of the Europeans are doing, and they're expecting us to cover them. Of course, they can't even cover themselves. Look at the riots they're having over there. All right, I beat on this enough. Bottom line, this war could go either way, and it's going to get more intense. and it could go nuclear. I know some people, I want to go nuclear. Well, if I'll tell you, it's an existential fight on both sides. Both sides see it as existential for their survival. Both sides have their perspectives why they think this it's critical to do what they're setting out to do. Now, how long that'll be maintained, we'll both keep that attitude, especially if Russia starts to fall apart or Ukraine falls apart. Ukraine will be a hollow shell in a year or two. They're going to lose so many people in this battle, they won't be able to maintain it. They could just be run over at that point. And, that would not, none of this is pretty. None of it's pretty. If we had an ideal peace treaty, it would be to let Luhansk and Donetsk vote, and by an outside, have an outside arbiter checking it, not Russian or Ukrainian, and whatever their futures to be, and both sides back off and have a demilitarized zone, blah, blah, blah. But I just don't, I have a hard time thinking that's going to last or endure in any way, shape, or form. In Crimea, the Ukrainians will never be happy with Crimea being Russian, because it can always be struck from Crimea very easily. Crimea is like a fortress island, almost an island. It's peninsula, but barely, almost an island. In Russia, can't afford to lose Crimea because that's a warm water port, major naval base for them. Now, I've said many times Russia got a nuclear war for Crimea. All right, my friends, that really boils down the grittiness of what we're facing here. It's a gritty battle. We seem to be in it, whether you want to be or not. As a United States, been part of NATO, and the commitments made by our president. He's made commitments that he's tried to set them up where even the next president can't overturn them, in terms of commitments to Ukraine, commitments to NATO. So he's trying to set where he can't withdraw from NATO, or we can't pull back our aid from Ukraine, wherever you stand on that. I'm not taking any stand. I'm just telling you what they're trying to do. I'm telling you that the Ukrainians have looked, and they lost a lot of people in Holodomor. The Russians lost a lot of people in the Barbarossa operation. So both of them have things that's got them worried. But, right now, there's nobody in Europe that would want to really and truly invade Russia. It's just not, I think those countries are a little bit on the limp side, when it comes to wanting to be robust and aggressive. And I just don't see that anymore out of Europe. But see, what the Russians are thinking as well, China, Germany may not want to invade us today, but we don't know about tomorrow. And this is, given our population, our demographic collapse, this is our last great chance to secure these gaps, these borders. So that's about the whole idea that they got to right to subjugate other people to do it. Yeah, I got an issue with that. A lot of people, you want to throw out 1,000 other reasons why this war is going on. Yeah, I've heard them all. I think all that is just what they're throwing out there to justify what they're doing right now. I think it really boils down to filling those gaps. Because why? Vladimir said so. That's why. At the Peter the Great ceremony. So, and he's following the long-time strategy of Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. That's what a lot of people said. So that's where the danger lies to the West, is that he want to take more than just Ukraine, if that's truly his objective. And that's what he indicated. So, my friends, buckle up. We're in for a rough ride. My whole point for making this video is just to show you how gritty it's going to get. So you'll know to get ready, and you'll know that you probably got some time to get ready, because I'm expecting it to get gritty this fall, probably worse in the winter. So you got a little time. You got at least a couple months, I hope. Things could pop off and go ugly. In a minute, of course, we're talking, this is a war. Nobody knows how. And no plan survives the first contact with an enemy, they say. And that's really true on a day-by-day basis in any war. You may have all your strategies and all your game and all that, but when it goes down, it's game on. It's who knows. Anyway, my friends, I wish everybody the best. Keep your eyes wide open and head on a swivel. Check out my links below. I've got long-term food storage, prepwithgreg.com. You might want to look at that. And check out my videos on growing your own food, on eating free from the weeds and the trees. And also, right now with the monetary situation with BRICS, what they're doing, check out Defy the Grid below, and look at the idea of getting you some gold or silver in some fashion, if you're taking care of your food and other things first. Thank you for watching, and Greg out.